So me and my friends used to have this group chat that was mostly for sending stupid memes. Occasionally we'd talk about hanging out, but it was always the same thing. People would say, yeah, for sure, and then never actually hang out. The group was me, Emily, David, and Ryan. Ryan was your typical guy, always getting into weird situations and trouble. He was constantly meeting sketchy people on eBay or Craigslist, trying to make a quick buck off random stuff he had lying around. One day, Ryan was selling his four-wheeler and asked us to come with him because he didn't trust the buyer. We told him, if you don't trust him, why sell it to him in the first place? But Ryan didn't get what we were trying to say. He barely even acknowledged that it was a red flag. We were all confused as to why he wasn't seeing what seemed obvious to us. We told him to just leave it and wait until he could find a more trustworthy buyer, but he didn't listen. He told us the deal was on the south side of the city, which was the sketchiest area imaginable. That side of town was notorious for crime and kidnappings. That was the biggest red flag of all. None of us wanted to go, but Ryan wouldn't listen. Throughout the day, he was snapping us updates about getting his stuff ready and making progress on the sale. I messaged one of the other friends in the group chat privately and told them, I don't think we should let him go over there. They replied, why not? He's a grown man. If he gets into trouble, that's on him. We warned him. I thought that was a pretty stupid reason to abandon a friend who might get himself into serious trouble. No one else was listening to me though, and they insisted I was overreacting. They said if Ryan needed to learn a lesson, then so be it. Hours went by, and Ryan was at the person's house. We kept checking up on him because, like I said, the whole thing felt wrong. He kept snapping us back, reassuring us that everything was fine and that we were overreacting. But still, we couldn't relax until we knew he was safe. Then he sent a snap of himself in a basement. We all thought, why are you in their basement? Someone even commented, what are you doing down there? But he didn't respond, which was really odd. I figured maybe he was busy talking to the buyer and just wanted to update us. But then he snapped another picture from a different room in the basement. It was getting weirder and weirder each snap. Still, we ignored it because we figured if he was snapping us, he must be okay. The next snap was in a dark room showing someone's feet, but they weren't Ryan's feet. That's when we realized someone else had taken Ryan's phone and had been snapping us the whole time, pretending everything was fine. We started panicking. We tried to check his location, but the person who had his phone turned it off. We knew something was seriously wrong and that we needed to act fast, but we didn't know what to do. We tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. We thought about contacting his family, but none of us knew them. We were stuck. Someone suggested driving to the area to try to find his car, but we knew that could take hours and maybe even days, and it wasn't a guaranteed plan because we didn't even know the location. The next snap came in and I nearly lost it. It was a photo of fresh blood on the floor, wet, bright red, and horrifying. We all froze. That's when we realized we weren't just overreacting. Something terrible had happened. We immediately FaceTimed each other and tried calling the police from someone else's phone. But without any concrete evidence or location, we couldn't do much. We were completely out of luck. We all went to bed that night, frantic and unable to sleep. Days and weeks passed, and we didn't hear a thing from Ryan. Then, about 6 months later, we saw his face on the news. He'd been reported missing. I thought to myself, if we had just gone with him or stopped him, maybe we could have done something. After months of searching, the police gave up. Then, out of nowhere, someone found Ryan walking down the highway in nothing but his underwear and shoes. He looked starved, barely alive. When we finally got the full story in the group chat, we couldn't believe what had happened. To be honest, I can't even talk about it. It's too gruesome and traumatizing. I'm just glad that Ryan is alive. Hello, so this story is something I thought I'd share. It's been on my mind for a while. My best friend and I spend a lot of time together, and we're always making inside jokes. There's this particular house in our neighborhood that always stood out to us because we never saw any cars in the driveway. We never saw anyone leave either. Once in a while, we'd catch a glimpse of a kid, which was odd because they had a basketball hoop on their deck, but we rarely saw it being used. My best friend and I started joking about it, calling the house the kidnapper's house. We laughed about it at first, but over time, the mystery started getting to us. We decided to turn it into a little game. We'd make bets. I claimed they were kidnappers, and my friend thought that they were just weird and maybe even vampires. It became a routine for us. On weekends, we'd stake out the house. When my friend came over, we'd sit by the window with binoculars we bought off Amazon, taking notes like we were detectives. Yes, I know it sounds creepy, but for us, it was just a silly social experiment. We took turns watching the house while the other played video games. Honestly, we didn't expect anything to come of it. For the first few weekends, nothing strange happened. But as the weeks went on, things started to get weird. We noticed more people in the house than we originally thought lived there. We even started seeing shadows of animals like parrots or dogs, but we never saw the animals themselves. Sometimes we saw shadows of people, but we couldn't make out their faces. It was like the more we watched, the stranger things got. Our notes became a mess. None of the patterns made sense, and the number of people in the house seemed to change constantly. It was too much to track. We decided to take things a step farther and come up with a plan. We decided to bake cookies and hand them out to the neighbors. This way, we'd have an excuse to knock on the house's door and hopefully meet whoever lived there. My best friend came up with the idea, and I thought it was genius. The only problem? I'm a terrible baker. Our first batch came out inedible, so we had to redo them. While baking, we kept trying to figure out how it was possible for people to live there without us ever seeing anyone leave or enter. The only explanation we could think of was that they must be using the back door. But that didn't make sense either, because the back of their house faced a lake. Finally, the day of our plan came. We started handing out cookies to the neighbors closest to us and worked our way around the neighborhood. We asked a few neighbors if they knew anything about the house, but everyone said the same thing. They didn't know much, only that they rarely seemed to be home. That only added to the mystery. When we finally reached the house, we knocked on the door and rang the doorbell. No one answered. It was silent, eerily silent. My best friend turned to me and said, "That's weird. We've seen so many people there, yet there are no cars, no sounds, nothing." Then my friend noticed something. The door was slightly open, just enough for someone to push it the rest of the way. Curiosity got the best of me. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't let weeks of investigation go to waste. I pushed the door open and called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed, but it wasn't the kind of echo you'd hear in a big house. It was the kind of echo that happens when there's nothing inside. We stepped inside, and to our shock, there was no furniture. The living room we had been watching for weeks was completely empty. Room after room, there was nothing. No chairs, no dining table, no TV, nothing. We'd seen furniture before. We'd seen people inside. But now, it was all gone. We wandered through the house, more confused with each step. It didn't make sense. If they had moved out, there would have been a moving truck or a for sale sign. But we had seen people there just a day ago. Then we noticed the basement door. My friend insisted we check it out, saying, "Everything weird is always hidden in the basement." I followed as we made our way downstairs. The basement was cold, with concrete walls and wooden floors. Parts of it felt strangely warm though, which only added to how unsettling it was. Despite searching the entire house, we found nothing. The water and electricity were still running, as if someone still lived there. But there was no sign of anyone. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. We left the house speechless. When we got back to my friend's place, we didn't talk for the rest of the day. We were both trying to process what had happened. How could an entire house of people and furniture vanish in one day? We checked before going out to deliver the cookies, and everything had been there. We were only gone for 30 minutes. If anyone has any idea what could have happened, or if you've had a similar experience, please let me know. There wasn't a single trace of anything left behind, yet it was obvious someone had lived there. Some of the lights were even still on. The part I don't like to think about is the idea that maybe they were still in there. Maybe they were hiding, watching us. Maybe there are secret tunnels underneath the house. Maybe they're inside the walls. There are a lot of maybes, but no answers. This happened just a couple of years ago. It's one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me for sure. One day, I went to McDonald's to do some work. It can be a really good place to get work done from time to time. It's similar to a coffee shop because in many McDonald's locations, it's very quiet in the dining room most of the time. Plus, they have free Wi-Fi, outlets, and cheap food. So I went to the McDonald's location that was closest to my apartment. It was roughly a 5-minute drive, and after I got there, I think maybe one other person was sitting down. It was sometime in the morning, and I set up my computer at a spot in the middle of the restaurant with sort of high chairs. There was an outlet right there, and I plugged my computer into it. So, over the next chunk of time, I was just sitting there and working mostly. At one point, I got up and got some coffee and then came back to my seat. Some people came and went, but I didn't really notice them much. Then, after I'd been there for probably 3 hours at least, I was going to get another coffee. However, when I got up, I then realized that I didn't have my wallet. It had been in my jacket pocket on the left side, and I had taken my jacket off and it was hanging on the seat that I was sitting on. At first, I thought that I must have dropped it where it had fallen out of the pocket. I looked around the floor though and couldn't see it anywhere. Then I looked through all my stuff and checked all my pockets. I was very confused for a few moments because I couldn't find it. Leading up to that, I'd been very focused on my computer and sort of zoned out from the rest of the McDonald's. So I didn't know exactly when or how I could have lost my wallet. I just knew that I obviously had it about 2 hours prior when I got coffee. Then I looked on my phone and I noticed something that I hadn't realized before. There was a notification on my phone from about 10 minutes prior. It was from my bank and it said that my credit card purchase from McDonald's for like $1 had been approved. I hadn't used my credit card when I got the coffee, I had used my debit card, so now I was very confused. But then I had the thought that somehow somebody had stolen my wallet in this very same McDonald's and used it. To me that made sense, but it seemed really crazy. I looked around, not thinking anyone would be dumb enough to stay around the scene of the crime, but there was this one man sitting alone by himself at a booth sort of far away from me. I saw that he too was on his laptop, and he had one large drink at the table with him. No other food. Other than that, there was a man and a woman sitting who were both eating food. I thought that maybe the guy had stolen my wallet. Then he had used my credit card to get the drink. And you do not need a PIN to use the credit card, just the debit card. Obviously though, I didn't want to just go up and confront him. I had absolutely no proof of anything. It was just a coincidence at this point. I stayed there on my computer looking at the screen, really just thinking about what I should do. I was about to cancel my credit card when I saw the man get up from his seat out of the corner of my eye. He walked over to the little screen where you order. When he did, he sort of went out of my sight, so I didn't see what wallet he took out or what card he used. But then, literally right after the guy walked away from the screen, I got a notification on my phone. It said that another purchase from McDonald's had been approved. This one was for more money. At that point, I knew that this was the guy for sure who had stolen my wallet. I couldn't believe that he had the nerve to stay in here while I was still there. It was almost like he was mocking me. He sat back down at the booth after that. At that point, I got up and I walked over to him. I went right up to where he was sitting and he looked over at me. When he did, I said, "Give me my wallet back." The guy didn't say anything and I demanded it again. I told him that I knew he had stole it from me. Then the man started completely denying it. He claimed that I was crazy. I told him that I had proof, and I started to go on about how I saw him using my credit card and I had a charge for it. I was taking out my phone to show him, and as I was saying these things, the man put his laptop into his backpack quickly and then started getting up. He walked right past me as I was still talking to him. I knew that he was going to try to leave, so I followed him. He left the McDonald's building and I tried grabbing him, but he shoved me back and took off running. He ran to his car in the parking lot, so I quickly ran to mine. The guy left really fast, but thankfully the roads were not too busy, and I was able to see his car down the road when I left. He came up to a red light, which was kind of lucky for me, because he had been kind of far in front of me and he was also going sort of fast. At that point, I called the police. I got the guy's license plate and I knew the car type, so I relayed that information to the cops. And it's a good thing that I did, because after the light turned green, the guy pretty much sped away from me. He started driving faster and faster. At first, I was keeping up, but soon he started going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit and then 30 miles an hour over the speed limit. And I just wasn't willing to go that fast, so I slowed down and I let him get away, but I told the police the direction that he was going. At that point is when I realized that I forgot my laptop and everything else at the McDonald's, so I drove back. This was maybe 10 minutes after I had left. When I got back to the McDonald's, thankfully all my stuff was still there where I had been sitting. And also, the food that the guy had ordered with my credit card was ready and at the counter, so I went over and I picked it up and ate it. It was pretty good. A while later, the police contacted me saying that they had my wallet. Apparently, the guy had been speeding still and actually led the cops on a brief chase. He ended up giving it up though, and they recovered my wallet. Looking back, that was one of the craziest events that I've ever been a part of. I probably should not have followed the guy in my car. Other than that, I'm just really grateful to have my wallet back. The story I'm about to tell you isn't like the other stories you might hear about someone getting stalked or followed. Unfortunately, I was the stalker, and I was the one following somebody. I'm not proud of who I was in the past, but I can't change it, so I just accept it and tell my story. Maybe there are others out there who will stop being like who I was. So this happened about 6 years ago, so it's not who I am anymore. but I used to stalk people whenever I got the chance. I had a particular interest in certain individuals, but I could never really find the right person to engage in with any type of stalking way. That was until one day I decided to download Snapchat. I heard it was a good way to make friends, so I added all the close people I knew. They never knew what I was up to when I was home alone. Nobody did, and that's what I liked. I like to stalk people. There's a mentality that goes into being someone who likes to stalk people. As I said, I downloaded Snapchat and started adding my friends. One of them was named Emily. I had no interest in Emily, and I was fine with that. I really liked our friendship. But I think that I typed a few numbers wrong, and I ended up adding a random Emily instead. I didn't notice until that night when I got a snap from her, and it looked nothing like Emily's house or anything familiar. I thought about deleting her, but after a few conversations, she sent a snap of her face, and it was perfect. Her hair, the way she looked, everything I ever fantasized about. This was at the peak of my stalking phase. I immediately started asking her questions like I was genuinely interested in being her friend. But honestly, I just wanted information so I could scour the internet. She told me her last name and the city she lived in, and that was all I needed to find everything. Her parents, the inside of her house through Zillow. I also knew her dog, her schedule, everything about her. I probably knew more about her than her parents did. At this point, I knew what college she went to, and most importantly, where she lived. That fueled me as the stalker I was. I played it cool. She had no idea I was so obsessed with her. We talked, and to my surprise, she only lived about 30 minutes away. What are the odds, I thought, but honestly, in my mindset back then, I felt like it was meant to be. We kept talking, and I asked to meet up with her for some snacks, something harmless so she wouldn't figure out my true intentions. She agreed. When the day came, I got all dressed up in my nicest clothes and looked as handsome as I could. We went out for ice cream. It was casual, but I didn't want to let the chance of something deeper slip away, so I pursued her with interest. She seemed to really like me. Honestly, after the first time we went out, we texted each other all night, literally until 2 a.m. It was that cheesy love type stuff. Things were going so well that the lines started to blur between my obsession and actual love. But I had just met her, so I knew something wasn't right. From her perspective, I was just a really nice guy interested in her. But from mine, I had a different agenda. Even when I told myself I didn't, I'd get in my car, drive 30 minutes out, stop at a gas station to get snacks, and park down her road. I parked where I could barely see her house, but just enough to see her room, which was on the back side of her house. I never got caught. I saw her talking to her friends and hanging out with them. I never saw anything inappropriate like her getting dressed. I thought that was too far, and I respected that boundary. But my obsession grew stronger and stronger. Stalking turned into an unbearable urge to act. I started going insane. I checked her social media constantly, analyzed her posts, and tried to decipher her tweets. That's when jealousy hit me, hard. One night, she tweeted a cryptic message about somebody making her feel a certain way. I knew it wasn't me because we had only met once. The anger consumed me. I did what no normal person would do. I figured out a way to get her passwords. I asked her a ton of questions, and I slipped in a password-related question as a joke. Eventually, I got her password. I made sure to only sign in when I was near her house, so it wouldn't seem suspicious. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get someone's Wi-Fi password. Once I was in, I read through all her DMs and messages, just to make sure there wasn't anyone else. And boy, was I wrong. There was this guy named Brad, and he was everything I wasn't. I couldn't let that happen. I hopped on her messages and threatened him, pretending to be her. I said things like, "If you ever talk to me again, I'll call the police. Don't ever speak to me again. I hate you." I deleted the messages and blocked him. Honestly, I don't think she ever noticed, because she ended up messaging one of her best friends saying, "I think Brad blocked me." I was in the clear. At this point, I felt like I should have backed away from stalking. It was no longer harmless or fun. It was dangerous, for me and for her. But I didn't stop. We hung out again, staying up super late and getting breakfast together. Everything seemed fine. She smiled at me, and I knew I was in too deep. We went home and texted again, this time calling until 3 a.m. and falling asleep on FaceTime. It felt amazing, innocent even, but I couldn't let innocence be a part of me because I wasn't innocent. One night, I reached my breaking point. I wanted to break into her house just to see her. I couldn't stay away another second. I knew everything, when her parents weren't home, when they worked, and their schedules. At 4 a.m. on Tuesday, I made my move. I got in my car, drove to her house, put on a ski mask, and approached her home. I don't know what it was, guilt, a second thought, or a small part of me that still had decency, but I couldn't do it. I touched the window, found it open, and could have slid right in, but instead I closed it, made it look like it was never open, and then went back to my car. I took off my mask and gloves, blocked her number, and drove home. I couldn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling. Maybe it's because I had lost myself. Maybe it's because I became the monster I swore I'd never be. To this day, she has no idea how close I was, and I'm happy she doesn't. I hope she's living a happy life with people who truly love her. As for me, I've changed, and I don't do anything like that anymore. I'm not proud of who I was, but it's part of my past. This happened 2 years ago. I live with my wife in a small house in a nice but large neighborhood. There are very many houses pretty close to each other. It's generally pretty nice though, and I haven't known there to be much crime. In the time that we had lived there to that point, my wife and I had gotten to know some of the neighbors. So I remember that one day I was talking to my next door neighbor Marc casually. I'm not sure if we were both getting the mail at the same time or what. I just know that he told me there was someone around the neighborhood who had apparently been knocking on people's doors and windows at night. He asked me if that happened at our house, and I said no. He said it hadn't happened at his house either, but apparently a couple of others on the street had. I thought it was weird and wondered about it, but overall, after we were done talking, I forgot about it. It didn't seem like too big of a deal to me for some reason. Well, a few days went by and everything was fine. Then one night, I remember my wife waking me up in the middle of the night. After I awoke, she told me that she heard someone knocking on our bedroom window. It was covered with the shades, so I couldn't see who was there. I wasn't hearing anything anymore, and my wife told me that it had stopped just before she had woken me up. I got up and went over to the window and looked out of it. I didn't see anything, and whoever it was had plenty of time to get away by then. I remembered the conversation with Marc, and I told my wife about it. We weren't quite sure what to do, if we should call the police or something. We ended up not doing anything though, and just going back to bed. I figured it was some prankster, probably a teenage kid who lived in the area. However, it was still not right to be scaring people at night like that. The next night though, it happened again. This time, I was still awake. My wife was in the other room, and I suddenly heard a loud banging coming from the back door. My wife had been near that end of the house, and she came running towards me. I then walked to the back of the house where the noise was coming from. Our windows are pretty much always covered at night, so I couldn't see anyone out there. However, as I walked to the back of the house, I continued to hear the knocking. Someone was literally banging on the back door about as hard as they could. Now, I was angry and annoyed, and I really wasn't that scared. I'm 6'2", about 200 pounds, so I'm decent sized, and I figured I could take whatever punk was out there. As the knocking was still going on, I swung the door open. There was a man dressed in all black as well as a ski mask and sunglasses standing there. This guy was taller than me, probably 6'5", but also fairly thin. He was probably about 190 pounds. He stood there right in front of me. I had been expecting like a teenager or something. The guy then shoved me in the chest, pushing me back, and to be honest, he was pretty strong and I was not expecting it. I fell to the ground just inside of my house. The guy then turned and ran off through our backyard and then into the neighbor's yard. Soon he was out of sight, and I got up and went straight for the phone and called the police. Looking back, I know I should not have opened the door like I did, and it was dangerous. Anyways, the cops came out and did a bit of an investigation. At the end of the day though, the man was not found. But also after that, he never returned. I still don't know who he is, and I hope I never see him again. This has to be the worst thing that's ever happened in my time working at McDonald's. I used to work there years ago, and I had the job for just about 6 months. Most of the time that I spent there, I would just take people's orders behind the counter. I was young, and it was one of my first jobs. One day, I remember that the place was pretty busy. There were quite a few of us working, and I was kept busy taking people's orders. So, at one point, a man ordered, and I didn't even really remember him. That was, until he came back up with me with his bag of food. He claimed that his french fries were cold, and that he didn't want pickles on his burger, but he got them anyways. Right away, I felt like the man was going to be a problem, because I was right in the middle of taking somebody else's order, and there was a line of people waiting. The fact that he just walked right up and interrupted was pretty annoying and rude, and he was also really rude the way he was talking as well. I tried to ask the guy if he could wait a minute, but he refused. He got right up in my face. I tried to get him to calm down and asked what he wanted. The man started demanding a refund and to get a new order as well. Just then, my manager Linda started walking over and interrupted. She said, "No, no, no, don't give this man a refund. We're not doing this again." Then she asked the man to leave the store and threatened to call the police. I realized then that maybe there was a bit of a history with this guy. The man instantly started cursing at Linda. She kept telling him to get out of her store. Then they went back and forth for a short time before the man finally stormed off. Then Linda announced to everybody that if he came back to call the police. I was told that the guy was supposedly banned from our McDonald's for always causing problems. I guess he was always doing things like that. Well, I continued working, but only like 5 minutes later I saw the man. He was not inside of the McDonald's though, but outside in the parking lot. We had very large windows on the building, and there was a parking lot on both sides as well. I just noticed he was kind of walking around the parking lot. I was still taking orders though, but I thought that maybe the man would come back inside. Like a minute later though, I saw him walking holding a really large rock. He was still outside, and he must have picked it up from the rocks that we had somewhere in our landscaping. Then he proceeded to walk over to one of the cars in the parking lot. I recognized it to be Linda's car. He then got on top of the car and stood on the roof, and then threw the rock at her windshield, which smashed it. When it happened, a bunch of people looked over from the noise and saw it. The man then put his hands up in the air as if he had won something. He smiled, started laughing, and then jumped down and walked away. I took my phone out and called the police. Meanwhile, a few moments later, Linda came running out and saw what happened. She ran out of the store to her car. A short time later, the cops arrived and questioned a bunch of people, as well as looked around for the man. He was picked up pretty fast, not that far away. When I got off of work like an hour later, I know that Linda was still outside by her car talking to the police. I felt bad for her, but hopefully she had car insurance that would cover that. I didn't work at McDonald's for that long, but long enough to witness that crazy scene. I feel like some people might relate to this, because we've all heard of someone taking a Snapchat and noticing something they shouldn't have seen. One night, I was sitting at home. It was late, and I was completely alone. I lived in a very rural area, far from any neighbors or buildings, in a small town in Minnesota. I won't name the town, but there was no one around for miles. My house was pretty big because my parents were farmers, but they did really well for themselves. I'd say they were millionaires, so we had one of those rich farmhouses. It was white with columns everywhere, and the living room was the size of 2 kitchens. I'm just trying to paint the picture for you. That night, I was sitting on the couch, watching a movie, Snapchatting my girlfriend and some friends. I was eating, relaxing, and the whole night had been completely quiet. No strange sounds, no mysterious figures outside the window. I wasn't worried at all. I'd never had any incidents, not even with coyotes. I felt safe. Like I said, I'm being overly detailed to set the scene. My Snapchat was open, and I figured it was a good time to send a picture to my girlfriend because I'd just gotten out of the shower and I felt like I looked good. My couch faced away from the floor-to-ceiling windows, which I'd left open. Why? I don't know. There'd never been an incident, so I didn't think much of it. I snapped a picture and sent it to my girlfriend. A few minutes later, I noticed her name pop up in the chat. She said, "Kyle, I think someone's behind you. Do you have someone over?" She sounded frantic. I responded, "No, what are you talking about?" and I turned around. I saw nothing. Just to make sure, I took another picture, this time framing the window more clearly, and sent it. She saved the snap and replied, "Kyle, do you not see it?" So I looked closer, and my heart sank. There was a man, a full-grown man, about 6'5", standing outside my window, staring at me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Should I text her back? Should I run? Should I pretend nothing happened? I didn't want to panic her, so I played it cool and said, "Let me double check," but inside, I was scared out of my mind. I was alone with no service in most parts of the house. I thought, what should I do? What would John Wick do? Before I could decide, I heard glass shatter from upstairs. The smash echoed through the house, coming from the top floor. We had 4 floors: basement, main floor, upstairs, and attic. I panicked and remembered reading somewhere that if someone breaks into your house, you should turn off all the lights because you know the house better than they do. I ran to the light switch, and luckily our house had a smart system, so with one button I turned off all the lights and locked all the doors. But it didn't matter. He'd already smashed a window to get in. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a golf club. I wasn't about to let some intruder take over my house. I was in fight mode. I moved to the 2nd floor, thinking he wouldn't realize I was no longer on the main floor. I could hear his footsteps above me, slow and deliberate, like a movie. I didn't know if he had a weapon, but I gripped the golf club tighter. As I listened, I heard him coming down the stairs. I hid behind a wall, holding the club like a kid playing hide and seek. The tension was unbearable. When he stepped off the last stair, I swung as hard as I could, hitting him in the knee. He tumbled down the stairs and scrambled to his feet, running. I chased him, yelling, "Get back here," as if that would stop him. In my panic, I tripped and fell down the stairs, dropping the club. By the time I got up, he was gone, hiding somewhere else in the house. Now I was unarmed, searching for an intruder. I felt completely vulnerable. I ran upstairs to my parents' room, looking for a weapon. I found a gun taped under my dad's bed. I couldn't believe it. What kind of a person tapes a gun there? But I was desperate. I grabbed the gun and shouted, "Come out or I'll shoot." He yelled back, "Do it, I dare you." I couldn't pinpoint his location, but it sounded like he was in the far left corner of the basement. Without thinking, I ran down there and started firing. 6 shots echoed through the house, deafening me. My ears were ringing so badly I dropped the gun. The man bolted past me, jumping over my arms as I tried to grab him. Disoriented, I could barely hear or react. He ran to the front door, but it was locked, and he couldn't figure out the system. Panicking, he ran to the 4th floor and smashed another window before jumping out and disappearing into the woods. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. I immediately called my parents and told them everything. My girlfriend had been blowing up my phone asking if I was okay. My parents got home a few days later. I showed them the damage and told them everything. I yelled at my dad for leaving a gun where anyone could find it, but he said it might have saved my life. Long story short, the cops came and found no evidence of the man. With no neighbors nearby, there were no witnesses. I still don't know what his intentions were, but I'm grateful my girlfriend noticed something in that Snapchat. Without her, I don't know what would have happened. My neighborhood is usually the kind of place where you don't see much crime or strange incidents happening. That's why this particular night caught me so off guard. Everyone here has Ring cameras, and like those videos you see online, sometimes they catch something odd. Maybe someone trying to break in, or just a random person acting strange. My story is a bit like that. I live in a pretty uptight neighborhood. We're not the wealthiest, but we're far from being in a bad area. Everyone here is mindful about security, so strange occurrences are rare. One day, while watching the news, I saw a story about someone's Ring camera in our neighborhood picking up something unusual. It showed a person in a mask leaving avocados on people's doorsteps. I thought it was hilarious. When do you ever get the chance to live in a neighborhood with an avocado thief? Except this wasn't really a thief. They weren't stealing anything, just leaving avocados. The story caught my attention, and every few days there seemed to be new incidents with this avocado thief. I don't know why they called them a thief if they were literally giving things away. Honestly, I was hoping they'd leave an avocado on my doorstep, because I thought it would be hilarious. Plus, I wanted to catch it on my Ring camera and post it on TikTok. For 3 days, I waited, and then it finally happened. I caught the avocado thief on my Ring camera. I immediately sent the footage to the news, and soon after, my own house appeared on TV. Watching someone in a mask leave an avocado on my doorstep was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. It made my day, especially since avocados are my favorite food. Not long after, the avocado incident stopped, and I was a little disappointed. Life went back to normal. I was busy scrolling on my phone and doing homework. A few weeks later, while my parents were watching the news in the kitchen, something caught my attention. The avocado thief was back, but this time they weren't leaving avocados. Instead, they were dropping off mystery boxes. Some people received random Amazon items, things they actually needed, while others got completely pointless things, like a rock or a small tree. At first, it seemed harmless and even funny, but then other people started copying the idea. Strangers in masks were now showing up in the neighborhood, leaving pumpkins on doorsteps in December, or just standing outside homes without leaving anything at all. That's when things started to feel off. This wasn't playful anymore. I couldn't help but think, what if one of these people wasn't here for a joke? What if someone dangerous used this as an opportunity to harm someone? For a while, my house was left alone, and I figured I had nothing to worry about. That is, until one weekend when my parents went out of town. It's always when they leave that things seem to take a turn. I stayed home alone with my dog, a gentle lab who never barks and wouldn't hurt a fly. She's the kind of dog who would lick an intruder instead of scaring them off. That night, I was sitting in the living room, eating snacks and watching a movie, when my dog got up and looked out the window. Curious, I went to see what she was looking at, and there was someone standing outside holding a box. I thought, here we go again. I checked to make sure my Ring camera was recording, because I figured if the person wanted attention, I may as well let them have it. But this time, it was different. They just stood there, completely still, for what felt like an hour. I started to wonder if the sight of my dog was keeping them from approaching, or if they had something else planned. Eventually, I got tired of watching and I went back to my movie. When I checked again, they were gone. I looked outside, but didn't see anyone. My dog, however, started acting strangely. She was going from room to room, staring out windows she usually never paid attention to. Then, out of nowhere, she started barking. She never barks, so this really threw me off. I checked everywhere, backyard, front porch, side windows, but I couldn't find anyone. Somehow, they managed to ring the doorbell without being caught on the Ring camera, which made no sense. When I opened the front door, there was a box sitting on the porch with my name on it. That's when things started to feel personal. I hesitated to open it, unsure if it was some kind of a prank or something more sinister. To test it, I kicked the box gently. It slid across the porch easily, like it was lightweight. I kicked it again just to be sure, and that's when I noticed something strange. It left a dark, sticky substance on the porch. When I bent down to take a closer look, I realized it wasn't dirt, it was blood. I had a bad feeling as I took in the sight and smell. Whatever was inside the box wasn't normal. I didn't know what to do, but I needed to know what was inside. I grabbed a towel to cover my face and opened it carefully. Inside was a dead raccoon, its body completely hollowed out. I couldn't believe someone had left it there for me. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just some prank. Whoever did this was watching me, waiting for my reaction. I tried not to show any emotion, but it was too late. I kicked the box off the porch and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. Not 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the porch again. When I peeked from the upstairs window, another box was sitting there. This time, I didn't want to deal with it. I kicked it around a few times, and when I finally opened it, it was empty. But inside was a note written in cursive that looked to be on expensive paper. It said, "Why would you leave the back door unlocked?" It included my name. Panic set in. I rushed to the back door, and to my relief, it was locked, but there were muddy footprints leading into the house. I grabbed a knife and checked every room, calling out for my dog. She wasn't responding, and I started to fear the worst. Finally, I found her sitting in one of the bedrooms, unharmed, wagging her tail like nothing was wrong. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, I saw a shadow move across the hallway. I quickly grabbed my dog and climbed out onto the roof through the window. From there, I could see the entire property. In the yard below, I saw a group of people gathering, holding what looked like another box. One of them asked, "Where is she?" I stayed on the roof for what felt like hours, hoping they wouldn't find me. I wasn't sure what they had in the box, but I could see them from the shadows, and I was trying my best not to make any noise. Then my phone buzzed. The sudden sound startled me, and I panicked. I worried they would hear it. The buzzing didn't stop. It was one airdrop after another. Fearing the noise would give me away, I grabbed my phone and threw it as far as I could. I quickly chased after it and repositioned myself to the front of the house, staying hidden from the shadows. From my vantage point, I could still see them, but now they couldn't see me. That's when I realized they weren't playing games anymore. Their reaction to losing sight of me was immediate and aggressive. It wasn't funny or lighthearted anymore. They were furious. I watched as they bolted into the woods, clearly disoriented. I knew the area better than they did, and I could tell they were headed straight for a swamp. This was my chance. I climbed back through the window, shut it, latched it tightly, and locked the door. To throw them off, I made it seem like I was still in the house. Then I grabbed my dog, put on her leash, and bolted out the front door. We ran as fast as we could to my neighbor's house. I banged on their door, desperate for help, even though it was really late at night. I probably startled them, but I didn't care. I just needed to feel safe. Later, I would see the irony. My escape was caught on their Ring camera. The footage of me banging on the neighbor's door became part of the same story that started with me laughing at other people's Ring camera footage on the news. After that night, everything went viral in my local town. People were talking about it everywhere. There was a city meeting, and soon cops began patrolling the neighborhood where the Ring camera incidents had taken place. After that, the strange occurrences stopped, but I never felt comfortable staying in that house alone again. For the next 2 to 3 months, I moved in with my aunt in New Jersey. The trauma from that night stayed with me, and even now, I think twice about answering the door. I went to McDonald's at night not too long ago. I go there all the time, and usually late at night. You see, I work at Walmart, and I typically get off of work at like 11 p.m. or so. I live in an apartment nearby with my roommate, and it's less than a mile away. I often walk to and from work, and right on the way back is a McDonald's. They're open 24 hours, so I go there a lot after work. One night, I left work at Walmart and started heading home. I was walking back. However, as I passed by the McDonald's, I realized how hungry I was. So I walked inside and then ordered some food on the touchscreen menu. As I was doing that, a guy randomly walked up to me. Now, we were literally the only two people in the McDonald's that were not employees, and this guy had entered after me. I looked over at him. He was kind of short, but was wearing a winter hat and jacket. The guy told me that he had followed me from Walmart. I was confused. Before I said anything though, the guy laughed a little and then walked away from me. I finished ordering, and then I went and I sat down to wait for my order, far away from the other guy. We both just sat there inside of the McDonald's on opposite ends. A few minutes later, my order was done, and I went up and got it. Then I walked outside of the McDonald's. I had been hoping that the man would not follow me out, but he did. After I started walking on the sidewalk, I heard the guy following me. I had no clue why this random guy would be following me. It was pretty much a straight walk back to my apartment building though, so I kept going, with the guy maybe 30 feet back. I thought about running for it or stopping and confronting the guy, but I did neither at first. When I had made it to where I could see my building in the distance, I thought I heard the man getting closer. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore and I just started running. But when I did, I heard the man yell something at me. He said, "Go ahead and run, I know where you live." This really freaked me out. I kept running though. Maybe he was just trying to scare me. I sprinted all the way back to my apartment complex, and then I got into the building and went inside. The man did not catch me or anything, and I wasn't sure where he was at that point because I didn't see him, and I didn't hear him either. Then I quickly went to my apartment and made it inside. I locked the door behind me and finally stopped to catch my breath. I felt safe now, and my roommate was already sleeping by this time. Maybe 5 minutes later though, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I knew it was the guy who had been following me. He really did know where I lived. I walked over to the door, and as I did, I heard him laughing from the other side. I looked through the peephole, and he was standing there seeming very amused. Then he turned and walked away. After that, he did not come back. I still wonder why the guy did that to me. Was he just joking around? But how did he know where I lived? It was very weird. This happened about 5 years ago. I was 16 at the time, and like most high school kids, I was on Snapchat almost 24/7. It was the way that I communicated with all my friends, and I had like 20 different streaks with people. I still use Snapchat today in fact, but not quite to the same level. Anyways, one night, I was in my bedroom just watching TV and snapping friends. I lived with my parents at this time as well as my older sister. I remember that I was on the app and I saw someone new added me. It was a girl named Sophie, so without even looking at her profile or anything, I added her back. I didn't recognize her name, but I thought that maybe she went to my school or we had mutual friends. I didn't know why else somebody would add me. Also, without giving it much thought, I sent her a selfie without any words. I wanted to see who she was. She responded back within a minute, except it was not a picture of her face. She was outside and it was nighttime, so I couldn't see much. It looked like she was in somebody's backyard and there was a house. After like 5 seconds of looking at it though, I realized it. This was my house. I was so confused. The picture did not have her in it at all. It was just a picture of my house. I got up and went over to my bedroom window, which did look out to the backyard. However, we did not have good lighting back there. The backyard light was off, and there were numerous trees in the yard. I couldn't see anything. I kept looking though. Then I snapped the girl back, but instead of a photo, I sent a message. I asked who she was and why she was in my yard. Then, as I was still looking into the backyard, I saw a flash of light quickly come out from behind a tree. Then it went away. I barely saw a person sort of behind it, but I didn't get a good look at them at all. Then I got the snap of the picture that I had just seen being taken. It was a flash photo this time of the back of my house again with no words. I was so confused. I continued to look out the window. Then I saw what appeared to be a man run out from behind the tree and then hop the fence into the neighbor's yard. I couldn't see very well at all. It was literally just enough to distinguish that it was probably a guy, partly from the looks and partly from movement. I couldn't tell how old this person was or anything. It happened so fast. I was really freaked out, but told myself that maybe it was a prank by one of my friends. After that, I went around the house and covered every window and double-checked all the locks. Then I went back to my room. When I got there, I saw that I had a voice recording sent to me on Snapchat by the same user. I say user because at this point, I was sure that it wasn't the girl it appeared to be on Snapchat. I played the recording. It was the sound of a man laughing, and he seemed older than high school age. I was so creeped out. I started snapping all my friends, telling them about it. None of them seemed to have any idea who it was, as if it might have been a prank or something. After that, I blocked the user. For a few weeks, I felt paranoid, wondering if somebody else would add me, or if someone would show up in my backyard, but nobody did. I still wonder who did that and why. I used to work at a McDonald's many years ago. Mostly I was a cashier and I would take people's orders. I often worked at night and there would sometimes be some pretty late nights. Back then, the McDonald's that I worked at was open until 2 o'clock in the morning. Things would typically quiet down significantly from about 8 p.m. to the rest of the night. The last few hours would generally be very slow. Sometimes on weekends or other random nights it would get busy, but generally it was pretty quiet. So one night I remember that I was working until 2 a.m. I can't remember what time it was exactly, but probably at about 10 o'clock it became just me and one other coworker. It was a girl named Gloria who I was friends with, and she was around my age, but had worked there a lot longer than me. She was a manager now and did whatever was needed, really. At this point I was taking orders and she was doing all the cooking. It was just us two until close. We got a few customers here and there and it was really pretty quiet. Soon midnight rolled around. I remember that I was out by the register standing there and just hanging out. I happened to notice someone was outside in the parking lot though. It was a man, and he looked in on the large windows that we had. He was just standing there, not moving, but appeared to be looking at me. Maybe it was partly because it was midnight and very quiet, but the sight of him instantly gave me the creeps. He had long hair, I remember, and a beard as well. He looked to be maybe in his 30s or so. I was sort of confused as to what he was doing and thought that maybe he would come inside. To be honest though, I didn't want him to. The man continued to stand there and stare at me. After like 30 seconds of this, I got too uncomfortable and I walked into the back. I went over to Gloria, who was bored with nothing to do because there were no customers. She was watching this mounted TV that was in the corner of the kitchen, so I joined her for a minute or two. Then I went back out to the front and I looked out of the window and the man was gone. I was glad to see that. So a while later, maybe an hour, I believe was the next customer to come inside. I helped them and I remembered that I gave them their food and they went to leave. It was then that I noticed the guy was outside of the window again. He was standing there and looking at me once more. I was surprised that he was back, and once more I did not want him to come inside, and he still didn't. After like a minute, I went to the back to tell Gloria about the guy, and when we came back, he was gone. I was a tiny bit disappointed because I wanted Gloria to see the strange man, but I was also glad that he was gone because I had been nervous that he was going to come inside. He just seemed really sketchy for some reason. So, for the final hour of us being open, we didn't get any customers and I didn't see the guy. At 2 a.m. we locked up and several minutes later I was ready to leave. Because Gloria was the manager, she was going to stay back for a few minutes and finish up some other stuff. I was tired from work and excited to go home and sleep. So I went to the door. When I did though, I was afraid that the man was going to be out in the parking lot somewhere. I didn't see him, but I was still worried. So after I went outside, I just sprinted to my car, which was not that far away. Then I got inside and I started the engine. It was at that time when I looked out of the window and I saw the man standing on the other side of the parking lot a ways away. I was afraid that he might approach me or something, so I quickly drove away and left. By the next time that I worked, I had mostly forgotten about the man. Now, I believe it was like a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later. It was basically the same setup as before, which was fairly common. It was a quiet night at about midnight. Me and Gloria were the only two people working once again. So I recall that at some point a little after midnight, I saw the man again and I instantly remembered him. He was doing pretty much the same thing of just standing there outside and staring at me. But this time, after like 30 seconds, I saw him turn and walk away. I didn't know who this guy was or what he was doing. The way he would just stand there and stare at me was very creepy though. So I didn't see him after that for the rest of the time that we were open. At 2 a.m. we locked the doors. Soon after, I went to leave. This time though, before I left McDonald's, I noticed that the man was in the parking lot, and he was standing right behind my car. I would have to walk right past him to go to my car, and he was also staring at me. I went to Gloria to show her the guy. When she came back, she saw that the guy was still there. He was just standing there and staring at us both now. I wanted to leave, but I did not want to walk past him. After about a minute, we opened up the door and asked the man to please leave the property. When we said this, he did not leave, but instead he started walking in our direction. We quickly closed the doors again, which would automatically lock now. The man reached the doors and tried entering McDonald's. Thankfully, he couldn't get in. Gloria and I considered calling the police. We didn't want to have to do that if he wasn't dangerous or anything though, so we decided to just wait around for a short time longer. Gloria and I finished up everything that had to be done. By the time that we were done with that, the man was still in the parking lot. We waited around for probably another 10 minutes. Then, finally, we saw the man casually walk away and leave the McDonald's premises. Gloria and I then went to the door and we both quickly ran for our cars. We were then able to leave and go home. After that shift, I never saw the man again. I only worked at the McDonald's for about another month though. I think that Gloria worked there longer, so it will be interesting to know if she ever saw the guy again. One thing for sure though is that he definitely gave me the creeps. The way he just stood there staring at me in the empty parking lot is something that I will never forget. I downloaded Snapchat again a while ago. I usually take breaks from it because social media can affect my mental health, but I thought everyone else has it, so maybe it's a good way to stay in contact with my friends. I started snapping people back and noticed that since I last used it, they added a new feature where you could quick add people. I thought it was pretty cool, and maybe I'd make some new friends. Not long after, I started getting added by a few people. I didn't think much of it and gave it a blind eye, but I chatted here and there. Then, out of nowhere, about 2 days later, I was added to a group chat. At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed like a normal group chat of about 10 to 15 people talking about random stuff. Mostly it was guys, and they talked about typical things that guys talk about, like cars and sports, although there were a few women in the group. I barely participated and rarely said anything. A few more days passed, and still nothing weird had happened, which is funny because usually by now I'd be getting unsolicited messages. Then someone added me. His name was Josh, and he was from the group chat. He started messaging me personally, but never mentioned anything about the group or anybody in it. It seemed like he was trying to get to know me. We talked a lot, sometimes all night, and even FaceTimed a few times. He'd ask me things like what I liked to do and what my favorite food was. It was nice, and I was happy to make a normal friend. But then he started asking weird, personal questions. It felt like he was fishing for something, but I couldn't figure out what. One night, he asked me something strange. I can't even remember exactly what, but it was enough to make me uneasy and wonder if something was off about him. Then it happened. Everyone got kicked out of the group chat except for me and 6 other guys. It was unsettling, but I tried not to think about it too much and I brushed it off. This time, the group was a lot more talkative, not just to each other, but specifically to me. They acted like we'd been best friends for years. I played along but remained skeptical about Josh. Soon enough, we all got close, and they started suggesting hanging out as a group. They wanted to play pickleball around 8 p.m. I was confused. Why so late? But they explained it was because everybody worked late, so I agreed. I mentioned it to some of my friends, and they said that it sounded sketchy, but nothing bad had ever happened to me before, so I didn't think much of it. That night, I grabbed my pickleball gear and headed to the meeting spot. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty. I assumed they weren't there yet, so I waited. Eventually, I saw cars pulling in, 6 of them. At first, I was relieved, thinking I was overreacting. But then I noticed something strange. The cars all parked on the opposite side of the lot, far from mine. Josh and the others got out, along with a woman who I didn't recognize. She had her pickleball gear with her and walked over to them. They all gathered around her as if talking, but then suddenly they grabbed her. In the blink of an eye, they shoved her into one of the cars. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't normal. I fumbled for my phone, panicking, and checked the group chat. Josh had just sent me a message. "Where are you? We've been waiting for you. It's about to open." They wanted me to show up. I froze and realized that could have been me. My mind raced as Josh sent another message. "Why aren't you responding? Is something wrong?" I looked up, and the group was still in their cars. The woman's car was off, and someone else then got into it and drove it away, probably to hide the evidence. That's when I realized what had just happened. That girl had been kidnapped. It hit me hard. With Snapchat's new update, random group invites had become a tool for traffickers. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that felt safe. I stayed in my car and I drove away. As I did so, I called the police and reported everything, giving descriptions of the car and the guys the best I could. I don't know if they saw me leave, but I immediately blocked Josh and left the group chat. To this day, I still get random friend requests on Snapchat, but I'll never add someone I don't know again. This is something that happened back when I was younger. I lived in a pretty calm neighborhood. It was packed with houses, kids playing in the street, and people grilling outside. During the time of this story, it was summer, so the neighborhood was lively. I knew my neighbors, but they didn't know me. The only reason I knew them was because I'd overhear conversations through their open kitchen window, but they knew nothing about me. Our backyard was fenced in, and so was theirs. The fences met at one point, so there were small cracks in the wood, not big enough to see clearly through, but enough to catch a glimpse if you got close. I spent a lot of time outside practicing baseball in our batting cage or playing with my dog, so I was usually out there. I never really thought about whether the neighbors spent much time in their yard until something strange happened. One day, as I was walking past the fence, I heard something, a whisper. I stopped, confused. I stood there listening, but it was quiet. I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it or if it was just the wind. After a moment, I shrugged it off and kept going. The next day, I was outside again, this time playing with my dog. I wasn't making much noise, but then I heard it again. This time, it sounded like someone saying, "Hey." I paused, trying to figure out where it came from. It sounded close, like it was coming from the fence, but I couldn't see anyone. I started to wonder if I was imagining things. I told myself that if it happened again, I'd get to the bottom of it. I noticed it only happened when I was outside during the day, so I decided to switch my routine. I started practicing at night when it was quiet and pitch black. The high fences made me feel safe, and I liked the peacefulness. One night, after finishing my practice, I paused to gather my things. Everything was calm, and I was just enjoying the quiet when I heard it again. This time, it said my name, Cassidy. I stopped what I was doing and looked at the fence. It felt like it came from right behind it. I leaned closer to the cracks in the wood and thought I saw something, a shadow or a figure. I couldn't make it out clearly, but it felt like it was watching me. I couldn't imagine how anyone could know my name. I'd never told my name to anyone in the neighborhood, and my parents didn't talk to the neighbors either. I tried to stay calm and act like I didn't hear anything, but the voice came again. "Cassidy, don't ignore me." I decided to respond. I walked closer to the fence and said, "Hello?" But nobody answered. I put my hand on the fence, and suddenly there was a loud bang. Something had slammed into the wood with enough force to crack it. Almost immediately, I heard vicious growling and barking. It sounded like a dog was tearing at the wood from the other side, biting it like it was styrofoam. The noise was frenzied, like whatever it was on the other side wanted to break through. I panicked and ran inside to tell my parents. When I explained, they looked confused. "The neighbors don't have a dog," they said. I insisted I wasn't imagining it, and they followed me outside to check. Sure enough, the fence was cracked. The wood had been pushed outward, like something had slammed into it. We went over to talk to the neighbors. They seemed surprised when we told them what happened. They repeated what my parents said. "We don't have a dog. The only person in the backyard was our daughter, and she's 7. That didn't make sense. How could a 7-year-old break through a fence with enough force to crack the wood? The neighbors didn't seem to believe what we were saying, but their backyard had security cameras, so we asked them to check. We watched the footage. We didn't see anyone or anything near the fence. Their daughter wasn't even outside at the time, but the audio was clear. You could hear the whispering, the growling, the barking, and the loud bang when the fence cracked. Everyone stood there, unsure of what to make of it. One of the parents suggested it might have been an elaborate prank pulled off by the kids using a sound machine or something, but even that explanation sounded silly. How would kids have done something like this without being seen? And why? To this day, I think it was their daughter. Something about her didn't sit right with me. I'm not a big believer in supernatural stuff, but that night felt unexplainable. Anyone I've told this story to doesn't believe me, but I know what I heard, and I know what we saw, or didn't see. My family moved out after a year. During that time, I avoided the neighbors completely. Occasionally, I'd catch their daughter watching me through the fence, just standing there, staring. I never acknowledged her.